Hello and welcome. We're going to get started in just a minute. I want to give folks an opportunity to join the webinar and get settled. All right. Welcome to Budget Basics, Understanding the Houston ISD Proposed Budget. I'm Trista Bishop-Watt, and I serve as the Director of Government Relations with Houstonians for Great Public Schools. At Houston GPS, we're committed to providing parents, families, voters, and Houston ISD community leaders with accessible information so we can work together to maintain and pursue excellent public schools in every neighborhood. As the Houston ISD board is considering next year's budget, we want to provide this opportunity for folks to hear directly from district leaders. We know not everyone is able to attend the board's evening budget workshops. If you were able to join our last Budget Basics webinar, we previously covered how funding is allocated by the state to school districts and how HISD has historically allocated money to campuses and central offices. Today, we're digging into HISD's proposed budget for next school year. I'm excited to be joined by Chief Jim Terry, HISD's Chief Financial Officer. Chief Kristen Hull was not able to make it with us today, but we are very excited to have Chief Terry. He will be walking us through the processes and planning around the budget. And thank you so much for being with us today. We're and sharing your insights. So without further ado, Chief Terry, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you all very much for allowing me this opportunity to share with you our budget process, and struggles we've gone through this year to put it together. With this, I'll share my screen, and that should be right now. So here we go. So this is the executive summary that I'm not going to read through this. I'll let you go through this. I'm sure this deck is going to be made available to all of you. It talks about our revenue and where our revenue is coming from. And if you've been through the Finance 101, then you understand how our what's called entitlement from the state is calculated, and then and that the assessed value within the district times the tax rate allows us to make our entitlement that the state says we have. Expenditures, we're going to go into expenditures. So let me go through this deck and get to that expenditures and how we came about that expenditures. So what we call the total budget allocation for next year is $2.1 billion. This is $127 million less than it was from the previous year. A little misspelling right there. Total allocations to the department is $702 million, and that's 76 million decrease from last year. Total allocations to school is $1.4 billion, which is 51 million decrease. The beginning of the year fund balance. Well, the way that the fund balance works is like at home, you have so much revenue and you subtract out your expenditures from that, and that then leaves you that little extra that you have left over. You put into a savings account, and that's what we call the fund balance. And we think that at the end of this year, meaning July 24, actually June 30th of 2024, we'll have $932 million in the fund balance, and that ending fund balance becomes the beginning fund balance for next year, 932,000 million. Projected end of the year fund balance for next year is we're predicting it'll be 101 million. That difference between the 932 and the 800 is $130 million, which is what we'll use out of the fund balance to help fund and overcome what we called kind of the revenue resource gap that we face for this year and next year. So the federal panic relief fund, which was called ESSER, and ESSA, which are most of our title funds that will no longer be available to us, is $386 million. That's part of what we're facing right now, is how do we overcome that 386 million, and when we add other resources, what we would have this year, not next year, the total is 528 million, and that's the difficulty that we face for this year and next year.
Before you move on, Chief Terry, can I dig into this a little bit and clarify? So the total budget allocation here is really the operating budget of the district, correct?
Correct.
But doesn't include the pool of money that the district had been receiving for federal pandemic relief, which is called ESSER.
Correct. You'll see in a slide that over the course of ESSER, this district received $1.2 billion. And part of the problem is this, is that way back before ESSER, we essentially had more students than we had cost. But after ESSER came in, student declined, and you'll see a slide in where over the last 6 years, we've declined by over 31,000 students, and we are funded based on those students. But in terms of our costs have gone up over the years, and the reason that costs have gone up over the years is that ESSER filled a big gap in terms of losing students, losing income, but ESSER filled that income, and in previous administrations, they did not take the time to kind of match their losing enrollment with the losing in staff, and that has caused a huge deficit. As I say, that deficit right now that we're trying to overcome is 528 million.
Okay, and so when we're looking at this, in that first row, that 127 million decrease from the expenditures last year is just from the operating budget. That doesn't factor in the ESSER funds. The total gap is at the bottom, that does factor in the federal pandemic relief funds that the district is no longer going to be receiving, correct?
Yeah, that includes that includes all of the ESSER, because ESSER comes to an end in September. From our perspective, it ends June 30th. And then it also includes a little bit of ESSA funds, which are the title funds, Title I, Title II, et cetera, other federal funds, and that also has declined. So those two things have decreased. As a matter of fact, if you want, maybe it would be best if I go to give you an understanding to this slide right here. So let's look at this slide. So this slide shows you the revenue sources for 2024. That's this year. So local and state, you can see in this graph is 1.9. Next year from the local, state, and federal, it'll go to 1.8 million. And then you look at what we call other sources of revenue. It was 90 million this year. Next year it'll be 97 million. And then we use what we call the use of the fund balance. That's digging into our savings account. This year, by the end of this year, we'll have used 194, just short of 200 million. Next year, we're planning to use $131 million of the fund balance. So here's that number that you saw for this next year, the source, $2.116 billion. But last year, that amount was $2.226 billion. Then what we want to do is in ESSA, those are the title funds, and we had 284 million this year. Next year, we're predicting we'll only have about 190 million. And then this is one of the big the big drops is here is the ESSER. ESSER comes to an end, no longer. So you can see this year is 0. So we then total this up, when we add the general funds along with the grant funds, you can see that the difference is 528 million. That's how we get the 528 million, which we have to overcome.
Thank you so much for clarifying that.
Okay, so let's go back here. So we'll talk a little bit about the board goals and the action plan. We'll talk a little bit about revenue overview. We'll talk about expenditures. The superintendent and the board work out what they consider. These are the board goals that we want to achieve while the superintendent is here. And you can see that this is essentially meeting grade level on the STAR exam and other exams. These then are essentially what the superintendent called Destination 2030 Action Plan in order to achieve those goals. And so the first and foremost is the superintendent came here. The budget for the current year was really already put together, and that was about $168 million use of the fund balance. And when we came, we added about another 100 million in order to establish what we call the new education system of schools, known as NES. The superintendent want to reimagine the systems that we are using, just in terms of staff development, the way we use central office, and one of the big kind of innovative reimagination is he has gone to kind of a divisional concept where he's moved people from central offices out to the divisions. There are 4 divisional superintendents, north, south, central, and west. And we've put a lot of the staff and services out to those divisions. And the concept is that we can be more responsive to the needs of the campuses by putting the workers closer to the campus. Especially the next area would be the quality of instruction. Mike's quality of instruction is really, really different. If you haven't seen it, I suggest that you call up his administrator and go out and see a new education system. It is really different, but that difference is showing up in the STAR test. The STAR test has shown that we have outperformed the state. Central office effectiveness. Central office effectiveness is all over the place. From day one, we have looked at the way that the central office has operated and made the changes. Of course, the divisional concept is one. The other kinds of concepts is, again, looking at the way that we're structured with chiefs, innovative staffing. He wants to build what he calls a density of leadership, so that when the superintendent leaves, that we'll leave a leadership model in here, a strong leadership group that will continue to achieve the results which we will achieve during his tenure. Special education is a focus in terms of meeting these state mandated requirements. Leadership density, I talked a little bit about that leadership density. Of course, pre-K reading is high on this list. And of course, the Sunrise Center. The Sunrise Centers are centers that are out there to serve the needs, all of the needs of the students who may need more than just education. They need food, clothing, some kind of care. They're all available at those centers. So here is kind of a board where you can look and see on the left is key actions: add new schools, ask for a bond. That doesn't tie to any board goals, but you see add the NES schools, that ties to board goal 1 and 2. You look here, build staff capacity, that builds to all 4 of the board goals. So again, you can go through that. You can see these are the key actions that all of the divisions and all of the staff work to. We have specific key actions that plan and that feed into each one of these key actions. And with these specific actions, we have metrics to measure how we're doing and the progress that we're making towards these key actions that tie into the goals.
Chief Terry, I want to double click on that just a little bit so folks have an understanding of how this overarching strategy is working. So it's my understanding here that the Destination 2035 plan is the superintendent's long-term strategy to achieve these board goals. And the board goals are focused on student outcomes. And the way that we think of these key actions is as part of that Destination 2035 plan, these are the key specific actions that you're prioritizing in the budget in order to achieve these goals and further that strategy. Is that how we should be thinking about this?
Yes, that's absolutely correct. And certainly a lawyer expresses it much better than an accountant.
No worries. We appreciate your insight. I just want to make sure that that's because I know some folks might not be as familiar with the Destination 2035 plan, and I believe that that's available on the district's website, although I could be wrong.
Yes, it is. It's out there.
You can find it on HISD's website if you want to dig in a little bit deeper into some of these. I know that we've seen somebody that had asked a question to us around the details on pre-K to 3rd grade reading, and I think that's a really great opportunity to go and look a little bit deeper as we focus on the financial aspects of this. And so thank you, Chief Terry, for that brief aside.
And I can tell you for the pre-K, you know, we are trying to increase the pre-K seating out there. There's, I think that we've identified something like 29,000 pre-K students out there. We're trying to bring in the next budget year, at least another 4,000 seats available for pre-K. And we'll continue to work on that. This shows you the core principles and also kind of the guidelines that we have in developing our budget. So first is we do not want the budget to go below 800 million in terms of our savings account, or what we call the fund balance. That's done for several reasons. One is the bond rating. That bond rating helps us, if we go out for bonds, to get the cheapest possible interest rate to pay back on the bonds. Enrollment is projected to decrease by 4,000 the next academic year. That's a large number, and we certainly hope at some point we turn it around. I can tell you that in Dallas, when I was working in Dallas, we kept dropping enrollment, and our bottom was 160,000 when Mike Miles came and became superintendent. By the time he left, we had gained over 3,500. So I think that when people see the academic success that he's having, that we'll be able to slow that down, if not turn it around. The state has not increased the basic allotment. The basic allotment, which means, you know, the basic amount of money that the state gives us is $61,400 per what's called weighted average students. And the weighted average students is if a student, a regular student, and then a regular student may come of socioeconomic background, that the state will then put a weight onto him. And that is how we are funded then, or what they consider in terms of entitlement for the school district. That 6140 number has not changed for over 6 years. It doesn't keep up with inflation. It's really difficult, not for us only, but for across the state. ESSER funding will end. ESSER funding has been good and bad. ESSER funding was an opportunity for this district, was $1.2 billion, and was an opportunity for us to go out and to buy, kind of one-off items, like say a new HVAC system, or we did buy some buses. But it also was misused in a lot of ongoing services and programs that the school district and previous administrator wanted to continue, was put into ESSER, and now that ESSER has ended, as I showed you in the previous slide, is that no more do we have it, and so we've had to make really difficult choices in terms of what programs, what people do we keep as the ESSER has come to an end. So the core principles, though, by which we put together this budget was, number one, was to keep cuts away from the classroom as possible. We do not want to affect the classrooms. We do not want to hurt the kids in their educational programs. We also want to invest in teachers and school leaders. That means that we know that there are a limited number of teachers out there, and the competition for teachers and school leaders is fierce. And so what we did, and what we're trying to do, is put more money into the teacher salaries and to the school leaders. We prioritize actions and initiatives outlined in the district action plan, as was stated earlier, that's what our budget is prioritized around, is those key actions in order to achieve the board goals. We cut inefficiencies and right-size the central office. So there are a lot of positions that we really felt were not necessarily in order to keep the mission. And again, it was to keep classroom reductions down as much as we could, but there's certainly areas in central office, and especially in operations, that we felt like we could reduce and continue with the mission within the classroom. Finally, to the extent possible, we wanted to temper the cuts to schools that have control over their budgets, and is what we refer to as non-NES campuses.
So with these core budget principles, this is one, how the process that the district used to prioritize different items in the budget. And so this is keeping the classroom experience as intact as possible for students, and some salary increases for our teachers and school leaders, focusing on that district action plan, finding efficiencies, and then tempering some of the cuts to schools. Is that really what we're looking at here?
Yes. Absolutely.
Okay.
All right, let's look a little bit at the revenue. I first want to make a point here, and again, if you had Finance 101, you may already know this, is I'm showing the difference between apples and oranges. So M&O, which we call maintenance and operations, that's the budget, the core budget it uses to run all of the operations, the schools, the principals, the buses, the maintenance, the accounting, all
So
of that.
that's that 1.2 billion that we were talking about earlier that makes up the district's operating budget.
That's the 2.1 billion we were talking about.
2.1.
And the INS, which we're not going to talk about, is what's called the interest and sinking fund. Those are the oranges. That's a separate tax. There's two taxes, the M&O tax, which is 0.7065 versus the INS tax, which is 0.1667. So they're two different taxes. The INS tax, which we're not going to talk about, is used, and it's used to pay off debt. And the M&O is what we use. So all these next slides, we are talking about the M&O budget, the maintenance and operation budgets for the district.
And so that is also called the general fund, for folks that maybe have heard some other things around the budget.
That's exactly right. So many districts across the state, Houston is not in a vacuum, is operating with the financial challenges that exist out there. And this is essentially due in part to the ESSER and also in part to the lack of funding from the state. In 2025 revenue for the general fund, there are three sources the district will need to reduce to 1.9 billion, 54 decrease in 23-24 projected revenue in addition to 10-20 ESSER funding. This is the challenges that we face in the budget. We also want to keep all spending constant from 23-24-25 year if possible. And this is where we want to keep it away from the classroom if possible. The ministry, we've committed to right sizing the gap necessitating what we talked about, that 528 decrease over the next couple of years to deal with this. We will use the fund balance of 131 million next year, which is in the current budget that we're proposing for the board to adopt. So the funding shortfalls, these are districts in Texas are grappling with, and these reductions in costs are not just us, but all other school districts across the state. Over the past 5 years, the state education funding has not kept up with inflation. As I said previously, this has resulted in probably a 20% decrease in purchasing power for districts. So though we're not getting additional funds like you, our costs are continuing to rise. COVID, which is what we refer to as COVID relief fund, which we refer to as ESSER, again, is ending in June of this year. And since 2020, Houston has received almost 1.2 billion in ESSER dollars. And as I said, a lot of that has been used to fund M&O operations, and in fact should have only been used to fund specific projects. So this is just to give you an idea and a concept of what other districts are going through. Austin ISD have a 89 million deficit leading to 41 central office cuts. Spring Branch has eliminated 305 positions. Frisco ISD has a shortfall of almost $31 million. Sci-Fair has eliminated 618 jobs, 138 million shy of a balanced budget, which includes the elimination of 50 librarians.
So for HISD, we do have more of these ESSER funds that were coming to the district. And because we're a much larger district than the others in Texas, this is really on an inflated scale for Houston ISD, right?
That's exactly right. We're the largest school district in the state. So most of these districts are smaller districts, though they're considered large. They are all smaller than us. This here is showing you kind of a survey of statewide. This I think represents about 350 school districts that answered the survey by the Texas Association of School Business Officials. And you can see the noticeable impact that these reductions are having, which is in the red, and the purple is the top three challenges. So I want to kind of focus in on just these purpose challenges. And you see deficit budget, lack of resources. That's kind of number one. Number two is low decline, lower or declining enrollment. That's us. Lack of qualified staff to fill open positions. We talked about that in terms of the competition for teachers, aging facilities. Our facilities are on average approximately 60 years old. The last bond issue was in 2012. There's over $10 billion in deferred maintenance that really needs to be addressed. We have lower students' attendance rates. That's how we're funded, is what's called ADA, average daily attendance. So as an example, for this 6140 or $6,140, I'm just kind of putting the numbers out there. If a student showed up all year, next year that we have 180 days, we would get $6,140. If they only showed up 50% of the time, we then would only get $3,570.
So essentially what this boils down to here is that HISD is facing a lot of similar challenges as other districts across the state in terms of this budget season. So we're in good company, I suppose, but that doesn't change the fact that hard decisions have had to be made.
Right. Okay. So again, I showed you this early, so you can see again what these reductions that we've had to do to put together this budget. And of course, this is where our funding comes from. Our funding comes from the enrollment, and you can see that we've had a 14.2% decline in enrollment over the last 6 years. This is a huge number, 31,000 students. And the end of ESSER, again, I keep going back and saying it has an incredible influence and incredible amount contributed to this number that we have to overcome of 23 million. So what happened was, and just to let you know, ESSER was used to keep from making significant staffing reductions in the face of enrollment decline. So as enrollments declined, staffing should have been declining, but they didn't do that. They left the staff in position and used ESSER funds to keep those people at the district. ESSER was used to add positions even for what the previous administration thought were critical services. They were not eliminated until now, when the new superintendent came in, had to eliminate positions. They also used ESSER to provide one-time stipends that needed to roll into salary. So we pay a lot of stipends for especially hard to get teachers, and that's something that goes on for year after year after year, and it was in ESSER. So these are some of the things that we have to overcome in our next budget.
So essentially what you're saying is that for the past several years, federal pandemic relief funds that were a one-time pool of money over the course of several years have been used to kind of shore up HISD's budget and to add some specific positions that are adding functions to the district, but those are reoccurring expenses, and to pay for stipends that need to be incorporated into salaries to make sure that folks are still basically at the same level that they were before.
So here shows you that ESSER funds that were used for recurring expenses in our personnel, and this just gives you kind of a feel for it. So ESSER fees for Texas Success Initiative and College Access. And on the left is the name kind of the programs, and on the right gives you some of the descriptions.
So this gives us a sort of idea of the things that were prioritized as the district was thinking through which ESSER programs needed to stay and which ones could be cut to move towards a balanced budget. So many of these things in here are related to college career readiness, related to supporting students with disabilities, related to our early education. The exam fees for college access and Texas Success Initiative specifically, that's to prevent students from having to pay to take those tests, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and so all of this was being funded using pandemic relief funds, but now because these are critical to the districts, they're being moved over. Can you talk to us a little bit about what that process was like, how the district chose to prioritize these programs?
Well, I think we might focus in on the wraparound specialist, which has become a kind of an issue. So the wraparound positions, I think, began before COVID. Then, as COVID came in and money from the federal government came in, they expanded that service to where there was almost a specialist at every one of the campuses. And so, what the academics had to decide, because they had to reduce, is that they found that when they did a survey and use is that they could build kind of hubs within each school that had a wraparound specialist that would carry food and carry clothing. And we also have what's called the Hazel program, which is telehealth that students could use. And in a lot of cases, this lessened the need for those wraparound specialists. We also have the Sunrise Centers, which are in our quadrants within our divisions, which allow students to go to and to get the same kind of needs. So we didn't eliminate all of the wraparound specialists, but what we did do is we eliminated many of the wraparound specialists, and we then put the wraparound specialists, approximately 12 wraparound specialists in each division to help multiple schools within their divisions. So that was kind of a process and a thinking, and all of these things they had to decide: do we eliminate completely, or do we adjust? And if we adjust, do we have other ways of providing the same kind of services? And that's kind of the approach that we approach these issues with ESSER and moving or not moving into the general fund. This is more of the same from an accountant's point of view. This indirect cost was huge. By managing the ESSER funds, we were able to contribute over $40 million into the general fund to help our general educational program. But now that's gone and that's eliminated. So in a certain sense, that was not a choice. It just happened. So here in 24-25, the district revenue is 2.4 million. This is the local. This is for all of our funds. So let me lay it out. Is that when the board? Let's see if I can go. So let me I'm going to go down to this slide right. Yeah.
And Chief Terry, I just want to make sure that you're aware of the time. We've got about 20 minutes left, and I know we have a lot to cover.
Yeah, I'll go and, if I don't finish, I'm more than willing to come back.
Wonderful.
So this here then is showing you what the board item that is going to have to be adopted by the board. This is the structure that is dictated to us by TEA. This first column here of numbers is what we call the general fund. And the layout is by function. So you can see here, this is instructional related media services. The curriculum and development is the what is put together for curriculum, instructional leadership, which is the chief academic officer, school leadership, which is the principals, assistant principals. And you can see down here, of course, this is general administration. Usually people think general administration, is like 50% or 30% of the budget. And you can see that the general administration, meaning the superintendent and a lot of the chiefs fit in here. Then, of course, you've got facility maintenance, and 34 is transportation. 11 through 36 are either campus focused and or student focused, and you will see that most of the budget is there. So this is the operating budget laid out by function that the board will have to adopt, and you can see that the ending fund balance is 801. Then they must also approve the. I've got this little thing in my way here. Excuse me.
No worries, little technical difficulty. With the time that we have left, I would love to dig a little bit more into the campus impacts. And I know you've got some fantastic information about that.
Okay, so you want to go. Apologize for that. All right, let's get going through here and talk about expenditures.
That would be fantastic.
So the chief developed their own budgets in alignment with the district action plans, and the difficult decisions had to be made. And again, we talked about that. And then we talked the accounting expenditures and reduction in central office is where we try to get most of them going. So this just here gives you the action plan by chief that drove the budget in terms of what was aligned to the action plan and where they were headed. So I won't go through all of those. This is then addressing the 528 million shortfall. And again, it's right sizing the central office, evaluating central office programs and school funding for NES schools and for the non-NES schools. This is again a survey showing you the budget strategy used, and I can tell you, if you look at these dark purple lines, that we have used all of these strategies in order to get to our budget.
And to clarify again, that's the state survey. So this is showing where other school districts are also looking at.
Yes, that's exactly right. And so, as I said earlier, we had talked about, when Mike Miles had come, he had chosen two feeder patterns. What's a feeder pattern? A feeder pattern is a high school with the middle schools that feed into the high school, with the elementary schools that feed into the middle schools. That's called a feeder pattern. and he had selected two feeder pattern. One was cashmere, and one other feeder pattern. That was the original 28 NES schools that he came with his destination 2035. When he came in June, he brought all of the principals together and explained the NES system and how the NES system would change the classroom and the classroom approach and the staffing and the salaries, and said that we would start out with the 28. Well, 65 principals after that meeting approached him and said, hey, we want to be part of this new education system of schools. What happened was we brought together, we thought about it. Mike went back again and said, you have to understand the huge changes that would be going on, essentially trying to make them aware and in a certain sense maybe scare them off. Well, 57 said, no, we want in. And so we decided that we would bring those 57 along with the 28, which that made the 85 schools. And essentially we have the largest reform program going on in the United States with the change in the 85. Now there's a subtle difference between the 85 and the original 28, but altogether the 85 schools are what we refer to as the NES schools. For next year, we got back to STAR exam last summer, and we identified additional D and F schools. And those D and F schools were then added to the 85, which now makes 135 schools, 130 schools, which will become the new NES school for next year. And then there's 128 of the traditional schools. Most of those are A's and D's, and they have pretty much funding the same way that they've had in past years, with a little bit of an exception. And also the principals at these non-NES schools essentially are given a lump sum of money. They determine who they hire.
Chief Terry, I'm sorry. So the slide is still on the TASBO survey from where I can see it. So I just want to recap for folks to make sure that we have clarity. So we can think of HISD as essentially having two different types of schools for the purposes of the budget. There are the new education campuses, and those campuses, or NES, were chosen based on essentially student need. Many of those campuses that were not the opt-in campuses that chose to be part of the NES system were chosen for this type of reform because they were, D and F rated schools that haven't historically been able to meet the needs of their students. And then we have the non-NES schools, and those schools are operating much in the same way that they have previously. And those are really our A, B, and C rated schools. Is that correct?
That's correct. Well, most of the non-NES schools are A's and B's and high C's. But the low C's, the D's, and the F's are in the NES schools. And so here, this is the funding by type of schools per pupil. And the previous slides that I flashed through was just showing you the NES allocations in terms of staffing. That's one of the big differences. And so here, next year, you can see that the NES enrollment we're projecting 72,000, and for the non-NES 95,000. And you can see that this difference on what we call the base funding is about $1,800. But I can tell you that this difference is essentially due to two things. One is that the NES salaries are a lot higher than they are for the non-NES. The NES are still on the seniority pay system that they were on when we got here. All teachers in the non-ES received a raise for next year, $2,500. The other difference in this base funding is also dealing with the way that they're staffed in the NES world. They have what are called teaching apprentices and learning coaches as part of their staffing. If you want to see the ratios and how NES schools are staffed. They're here. I won't go through that, but it's pretty detailed. But in essence, this then shows the base. There are other things that make the difference in terms of the NES and the non-NES. So pre-K teaching assistants, school-based special education teacher support. You can see that in the pre-K teacher assistants, they don't exist over here in the NES, but in the non-NES, they do on a per pupil basis. The education, special education is where the big difference is, and that difference is in terms of the percentage and the type of special ed that exists in terms of the NES, the needs and the quality of those needs are much higher in the NES than in the non-NES. And then finally, utilize the utilization utilities costs. And so when you add these additional per pupil amounts, you can then see that there's a difference between the per pupil. If we were to look at that same.
Sorry, Chief Terry. So just to clarify, as a district, we are spending more money per student at the NES schools compared to the non-NES schools. And this is really reflective of first the model that Superintendent Miles is using to support NES schools, which does include higher salaries and some additional staff on campus. But really this difference in funding, we can also think of in terms of the need at each of these groups of campuses. Is that the way that we should be looking at this?
Yes. If you look, you remember there's a little bit of distortion in terms of the number of students when you look at it on a per student basis. When you look in terms of whole dollars, the base funding is very close. It's only 5.8 million to non-NES and NES. You then again have the pre-K teaching assistants, and then you can see the great difference in terms of the special ed needs over at the NES versus the non-NES. And then finally the utilities, and you can see the utilities are really close in the two assistants. And then here's the total funding, and you can see that the total funding is a $27 million difference. This then is looking at the funding changes, and this is again the NES and the non-NES from. I need to change this here. Okay. So with the additional 45 NES campus, the funding for NES campus budget decreased approximately 69 million. This is here in 23-24 NES, and then you notice that this decreases here in the budget for next year. This decrease was what we call the right sizing of the NES staffing models. When we first came here in June and implemented the NES, we had to look at, the people that were already in place, including the teachers who already had contracts. And so in a certain sense, that kind of distorted the number of professionals in those schools. And when we then right-sized it to the model that we felt that was appropriate, you can see that even in the NES schools from 23-24 has dropped by $69 million. If you look at the non-NES campuses in 23-24, you can see that there's basically very little difference between the 23-24 non-NES funds and the funds in 24-25. This decrease here, and again, we do have to be tight with our money, and there was a $16 million decrease in the NES from 23-24.
So in terms of what parents and families can expect in terms of their campuses, essentially the NES campuses are seeing a slight reconfiguration in the way that the district is doing staffing. And the non-NES campuses are seeing a slight decrease in revenue related to a change in the way the district is calculating enrollment, which really is going back to the way that the district used to provide schools funding based on enrollment prior to the pandemic, when we were holding districts harmless for enrollment loss. How is the district ensuring with these changes that the students' classroom experience is essentially still the same, like you mentioned before?
Well, I think that, well, actually, I think that this could give you an idea, an answer to that question. So if you look back before COVID, which happened in here, right, is that, and we look at the 18-19, that the non-ES campuses, per student is here, and the NES campuses are here, and they're fairly close, right? And so if you look at the NES campuses, the non-NES campuses are 5,300, and you can see that from 2019 to 2025, it is still grown. So all the pupils allocated on both NES and non-NES have increased since 2019, and the per pupil allocation has increased substantially more than the non-NES per pupil allocation, as we know with the reasons for those, which is the staffing that do the NES. But in terms of just the growth from here to 25, there was a growth. Its growth was approximately 28%, which probably keeps them at, if we take into an inflation into it, keeps them, basically the same. What we don't see here is we don't see ESSER in terms of the ESSER that inflated this number, because we have brought it back down to what we think that they'll be able to continue their program without any harm to their program for these non-ES schools.
So Chief Terry, just to summarize here, essentially what we're looking at is in terms of next year's budget, per student, for the non-NES schools, they're around in the same position as they were before the pandemic started, which was the last time that the state actually increased the amount of money that districts were receiving when we factor in inflation. Whereas our NES schools, our highest need schools, are seeing an additional investment in a way that they had not received historically in the district.
Right. Yes.
And I do want to flag that we are at time here, and I want to give you an opportunity to just hit any additional points that you wanted to make with this presentation before we close up here.
Let's go. Let's look at this. This is general fund expenditure by object code. So please note that in terms of object code, this is the payroll cost. That you can see that the payroll cost is by far the largest portion of the budget that is incurred in the district. And you can see that there's been very little change. And let me leave you with that. And I won't. Don't think that there's this object count. So, and this is the budget again that we'll bring to the board on Thursday for them to pass.
Fantastic. Well, so first, Chief Terry, thank you so much for coming and sharing this information with us. I think that it does provide some context about what HISD is experiencing this budget season. So first, that there are some real challenging financial circumstances this year that all of our Texas districts are facing, and an idea of how the district went about prioritizing different funding streams to ensure that the board goals were met, and finally how the district was sort of addressing those ESSER funds that were previously a separate additional pool of money that the district had that's going away in order to make sure our campuses have what they need, especially our highest need campuses. So thank you so much for your insight here. What I want to make sure that everybody knows is that HISD is having their regular board meeting this Thursday, where they will be considering this budget. They've had 2 budget workshops previously that are available on Houston ISD's website. If you go to HISD TV and look at the archived videos, we will be sharing this budget presentation with the folks that registered for this and later on our website and our social media. So keep an eye posted for that. And as always, you can visit houstongps.org to find more information about what's going on, especially with the Houston ISD board. So make sure if you're interested in knowing what's going on with the district, that's a great place to sign up for our newsletter, follow us on social media to make sure you know what's going on. Thank you again, Chief Terry.
Thank you very much for your indulgence and insight onto accountant's words.
No problem. We appreciate you and hope you have a fantastic day, everyone.
Thank you, you too. Bye-bye.